Recovery is not a model for service delivery. It is certainly not an intervention. It's rather more a philosophy, perhaps, a way of thinking about the kind of life that one can lead despite the exigencies of mental ill health. It's not new. It's been around for more than 20 years, but it is revolutionary in that it has been proposed and developed largely by people with lived experience of mental ill health. This is something which service users have developed and lived for themselves. It's their discovery, and we professionals really are now catching up with this and what our role can be in supporting recovery. In fact, in recent years, it has become accepted, both in the United States and in the UK, as one of the critical underpinnings of mental health services. And indeed, it appears as such in national strategies for mental health. So this is an idea whose time has come. This is something important for world psychiatry, world mental health services, not just in the English-speaking world. So, what I've been asked to talk about are the principles of recovery, the challenges that recovery poses for the biomedical model, and then to say very little bit about my own particular field, which is employment and recovery, and in particular the role that social firms and social cooperatives can play in that, because this is the route that Greece has chosen to go down in the way of employment. I'm going to start with a couple of quotations, one more recent, one from quite a few years ago, but which nonetheless I think capture what recovery is about. Mike Slade calls it an approach which focuses on living well with mental health problems, taking charge of one's well-being and developing a purposeful and socially inclusive life. And William Anthony, Bill Anthony, who's perhaps one of the founders of recovery being developed in the United States, has categorized, and this is one that some of you may have heard before. It is a way of living a satisfying and hopeful life, even with the limitations caused by illness. Recovery involves the development of new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the catastrophic effects of mental illness. So we're here talking not about recovery in the sense of cure. We are talking about recovery in the sense of recovering your life, being able to lead the kind of life that one always hoped to lead despite having periods of mental ill health. What are the implications? Well, firstly, it means that quality of life is more important than symptomatic cure. Of course, it very much helps if the volume of your symptoms can be turned down. If you find that your symptoms have disappeared altogether, it's great. But actually, for many people, symptoms come and go. Experiences, hearing voices, seeing visions, great difficulties and depression recur. But notwithstanding that, people can have and have the right to expect a decent quality of life. And that's where the focus is. If you can see already that this is really rather different from the medical model. And it's the individual who decides what kind of life they hope to lead, not the physician, not the social worker, not the psychologist. And it also implies a considerable shift in the balance of power between those who are offering treatment and those who are receiving it. In recovery, this is a partnership. This is something where the treating physician or the psychologist or the counsellor or the therapist is a partner, a co-worker with the person receiving the treatment, and is not the sole decision maker. Of course, there are points in serious mental illness when people may not be able to take charge of their lives, may not be able to be in control of their minds. This is not, in recovery, regarded as something catastrophic, disastrous. It can be very unpleasant, it can be very disturbing, but it is also something to learn from. And in recovery, then we look to what we can do in the future if this happens again. So the experience of mental ill health becomes a tool for shared learning rather than something shameful to be hidden or suppressed. And I'll come on a bit later on to talk about the kind of tools that we have for working together to overcome crises and learn from them. For the service user, for the person with lived experience, what does it mean? Well, it means living hopefully. That sounds very simple. You all know here in Greece how hard that is at the moment. And yet, if we do not live hopefully, we do not live at all. For human beings, we need to be optimistic. We need to feel that things are going to get better sometime. Otherwise, what's the point? And for the service user, this becomes absolutely crucial. Having the ability to see beyond the terrible experiences that you're going through means that you can begin to get your life together again. It means taking control, self-determination. It means that instead of being the victim of an illness, you are actually becoming in control of it, able to determine for the most part of your life how that illness develops, how it is treated, how you are treated, and how, most importantly, how you can make decisions about your own life based on your hopes and aspirations rather than on the negative lack of encouragement that frequently comes from people who are offering services. One of the most terrible things that is said to people who are experiencing severe mental illness for the first time is, and I've heard it so often, "Oh well, you'll never work again." And psychiatrists say this kind of thing, or have done in the past, all the time. And it's so devastating. It's the end of your life as a productive adult. And it's untrue, and it's unnecessary. And it's a cruel and unnecessary thing to say. As service providers, we have to be offering people hope and overcoming problems, not giving them the reality that their life is at an end. It's also an opportunity to get new roles, to rethink your life and your relationship, doing the kind of things that you value, and most importantly, joining with others in your communities to do things together, because we are social animals. We are not people who live our lives by ourselves. We need to join in with people. And of course, for service users, that peer group is not just people who, like themselves, are experiencing mental illness, but the whole of the rest of society. And that is the challenge. Many people who are in recovery regard it as a journey in which living and journeying well is more important than arriving. And of course, that's a very helpful kind of metaphor, but it is not just the individual who needs to be able to think of it as a journey. Actually, it is a journey for organisations, it is a journey for service providers, and it requires complete re-education, really, of the mental health workforce. My colleagues at the Centre for Mental Health, Professor Jeff Shepherd, Jeff Boardman, Rachel Perkins, have been looking at the challenges for organisations. How can organisations support people on their recovery journeys? And the answer is, well, organisations have to go on a recovery journey themselves. Staff have to go on a recovery journey. It is my experience, I'm afraid, that very often when it comes to deinstitutionalisation, the staff are much more institutionalised than the patients. This has certainly been the case in England, and I have observed it also in Greece. I'm not going to go through all these, but I just want to draw your attention to one or two of them that I think are of particular relevance to this gathering and to these organisations, the American College and EPAS. Challenge number 2 is delivering comprehensive service user-led education and training programs. Now, we are all used to the idea of training mental health professionals. We are all perhaps training, you may be training as psychologists, people training as psychiatrists. But actually, what we're saying here is that that training needs to be, at least in part, developed and led by people with lived experience and participated in by people with lived experience. This brings me back to what I said earlier about it being a joint learning experience. And of course there are ways of doing this. You can have little courses here and there, but in the UK, many big mental health provider organisations, public services, not just private services, public services, have set up recovery education centres in which courses are shared in the running and in the participation between professionals and service users to learn about how to live well with mental illness. And the kind of things that service users bring to this is, of course, their experience of what has worked for them. Far too often, professionals merely impart their knowledge. Actually, there is a whole reservoir of knowledge within the service user community about what works and what is helpful. And of course, not least, coming from people with lived experience, it's something that is very powerful for people who are just starting their journey, for people who have just begun to experience mental ill health. And so that's a very important aspect of education that I think maybe, hopefully, this partnership may be able at some point to take forward. And certainly it would be very possible for representatives to come and look at some of these recovery colleges. And then I just want to do a couple more, really, 7 and 8. Reforming service user involvement, transforming the workforce. Here we have not simply the role of service users as participants, of commentators on services, of the kind of participation that we have. Do you like this? Do you not like that? We have service users as service providers, as peer support workers, employed by the mental health providers to provide the sort of support that only people with lived experience can provide. In the UK, we have probably hundreds now, if not thousands, of people with lived experience of mental ill health employed in mental health services as mentors, as role models, as staff trainers, and occasionally as mediators between professionals and service users. This has a number of effects. It changes the culture of service users and professionals. The staff room is no longer a place where professionals can gossip about service users, us and them. It's a place where service users are, and if there are derogatory things said in staff meetings about service users, then the service users are there actually listening to them, and it's quite a shock to professionals for someone to come up to them and say, look, you were talking about this person, that's like me, I'm one of those too. And that is a real shock to the culture of professional staff rooms. It also provides a challenge to services as employers. If you're going to employ people who may be vulnerable, maybe have had checkered employment histories, you have to pay attention to your role as an employer. And it becomes very important to have a mentally healthy workforce and the kind of supports for everyone that are available to mental health services, because it's very demanding work and you need to look after your staff, whether they have lived experience or whether they don't. So just then to look at this, what does it mean for the biomedical model? Well, I think we've probably seen quite a lot of that already, but it broadens the focus from symptoms and diagnosis to listening to and thinking about the whole person in the context of their life, their hopes and aspirations. And it challenges notions of expertise. Medical expertise is not prioritised. There are different kinds of expertise that are brought to the table and used. Medical expertise is important. This is not to deny that medical folk have expertise, have training that is helpful. But that is not the only kind of expertise. Again, a shift in the balance of power. Recovery does not assume the need for or the benefits of medication. I'm not going to go into great detail in this one, but you will be aware that there's an increasing body of scientific evidence that is calling into question both the effectiveness and the damage done by psychotropic medications, antidepressants, antipsychotics. And for many people, the experience of taking these drugs is, on balance, damaging rather than helpful. For some people, this is not true. For many people, it is helpful, certainly in the short term, to turn down the volume of your symptoms while you get yourself back together. But in recovery, there is not the assumption of the pill trolley. There is not the mass distribution of medication to everyone in the institution. Medication becomes something that is negotiated between the physician and the patient. And if it doesn't work, you stop it. You don't accept that the side effects are necessary evils. The ultimate aim is for the person, the individual, to become an expert in managing their illness and their life. On to employment. Employment is, for many people, a very important part of recovery. Most adults want a job, whether they have a mental health problem or not. Not everybody. It's certainly true that for many people they are so damaged by their experience that they really can't ever see themselves having a job. But surveys show that perhaps 80–90% of people with severe mental illness would like a proper job. And I've given a quote here which I don't propose to read out by a very well-known American researcher, Professor Bob Drake, who is saying in effect that over many years research into medication, psychotherapy, case management, all kinds of interventions, nothing improves a person's health more than employment and supporting them into employment. Employment is a health intervention. A little while ago in the UK, a couple of well-known researchers, Gordon Waddell and Kim Burton, were asked by the Department for Work and Pensions, is work good for you? Is work good for people? What is the scientific evidence? Well, it is very good for you. Unemployment is very, very bad for you. And I know this is of enormous relevance here and in the rest of Europe at the moment. But they also had a qualification. Good work is good for you. So, what is good work? Before I go on to that, I would also like to say that in some work that we did at the Centre about the impact, the financial impact of helping people with severe mental illness to get jobs, we found a couple of things that may surprise you. One is that about more than half of those who wanted jobs, given the right support, could get them. I mean proper jobs here, not work in sheltered workshops, that kind of thing. We also found that for those who became regular workers, about a third of the cohort, the savings in healthcare costs were enormous over 10 years. So there is a really good economic case for pointing people in the direction of employment. But as I said, well, what is good work? And are social firms and cooperatives good work? Well, what I've done is to compile a short list of questions. Because the evidence is that it's good for you in proportion to it is like a real job. People benefit from being in what they can see and what the world can see is a proper job. So is the work real work for the open market? Is the pay real market level pay? Do people have a choice in the kind of work that they do? Are there opportunities to change jobs or to progress to more responsible and rewarding jobs? And is there good team spirit and collective responsibility for each other's welfare? All the sorts of things that you would expect and hope for from a good employer. Are those apparent in social cooperatives in Greece? Well, it's difficult, of course. We are very constrained at the moment. And the choices are limited. Certainly, I would say that at the moment for Greece, social cooperatives, which are in many cases very successful, are probably the best or the only choices available to individuals. What I would say, however, is that it will not always be like this. Greece and the Greek economy and the Greek jobs market will improve eventually. And it's important then that the social cooperatives are prepared to adapt to that new situation, to make sure that they are open to the open market, that they are working with mainstream employment, because otherwise they will become social ghettos, social enclaves, shut off from the rest of society. And that's really the last thing that anyone wants. There's a quote from a US service user who said, "A ghetto is still a ghetto, even if the walls are made of candy." I'm going to really rush through these last few slides. There are many tools that have been developed for helping service users and their service professionals to work together. One of them is the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, the WRAP, developed by Mary Ellen Copeland, who has lived experience of mental ill health. And it's about how you can plan to maintain your mental health and cope with crises, to learn from crises, to learn how you want to be treated when you are in crisis, and to learn how you can, once your crisis has passed, get your life back again. It's very important to plan for these things and to learn from these things. For everyone, it's different. There's something called the Recovery Star, which is a way for service users to remember and chart their own progress. There are a number of domains here that seem important to people's lives. And the lower numbers are where they're very dissatisfied with their aspects of their life. The higher numbers are where they are more satisfied. So as people's recovery goes on, the lines go from the middle much more to the outside, as people's horizons, as their lives expand. And there are also many instruments that have been developed, validated, for measuring recovery outcomes. And here you see some of the domains: service quality, improvements in subjective attitudes. What are they called? Recovery relevant dimensions. Increased attainments of life goals, improved quality of life, and reduced service use. These are the kind of things that people are measuring to see whether recovery-based services are achieving what they set out to achieve. Finally, I just want one quote from a service user, someone with lived experience, which I think encapsulates much of what I've been saying. "I require the freedom and self-determination to proceed under my own power, to succeed or fail through my own efforts, to have my dreams and visions meet the risk and uncertainty of daily life. This is recovery." Thank you.